Festive felicitations, Facebook friends, and welcome to Mr. Golian's Gory Story Theatre Company. Tonight is a very special night, Christmas Eve, and tonight is the time I'm going to tell you a story from Icelandic folklore, twisted about in my own unique way, and published in this fine tome, Dean Drinkel's The BESTIARUM VOCABULUM. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. And my story is called The 14th Visitor. It is set in a futuristic Iceland where the world is at war with itself, and one survivor of a lone military outpost is awaiting his last visitor on Christmas Eve, the one he believes has killed the rest of his men. It is a story of the Icelandic Yule Lads. Now, that may not mean much to you unless you know a bit about Iceland and its traditions. Iceland never had Father Christmas, and in recent years the Yule Lads have been changed slightly. If you see a lot of cards and wrapping paper and images of the Yule Lads these days, they're dressed up in the same clothes that Father Christmas has. The red, white fur-trimmed cloak, the little hat with the bells, and they are trolls, mischievous spirits, who really were quite harmless in the fact that they would only come on each day of Christmas to steal food from the kitchens. But, as with most Icelandic traditions, their origins are darker. And the story I decided to write for this book, let's just say I wanted to reclaim that darkness and imagine what it would be like in a futuristic setting. So, I give you the 14th Visitor. The image on the rifle scope made him pause. The figure was hunched, stumbling, just like the previous 12 intruders. But unlike them, this one had a distinct heat signature. This one was human. Corporal Ellis relaxed his trigger finger and switched the thermal imaging off, but he kept a red-rimmed eye pressed to the scope's rubber cup and watched the figure stumble through the snow-coated volcanic landscape. He remained prone behind the rocks that formed a natural perimeter around the base. Sweat beaded his forehead, despite the cold that cut through his army-issues parka. His mouth was dry, and he felt the Heckler & Koch G36 tremble in his grip, the stock vibrating against his shoulder. Perhaps it's a guy from Reykjavik after all, he told himself. But he wasn't going to take any chances. That was what had got the rest of his team killed. He licked his dry, wind-chapped lips and watched the figure approach. It took the same approach as the previous creatures had, the church path, framed by dark pillars of lava tunnels and volcanic rock, which gave the formation its name, Dimmuborgir, the Dark Fortress. The figure paused at the open-ended cave, named the Kirkjan, peering at the high dome-shaped roof through which the midwinter sun bled its last light onto the North Icelandic wilderness. It faced the outcrop behind which Ellis was hidden. The silver mane of hair and rat's nest beard billowing about the bowed head parted momentarily. It raised its arms and shouted, in a male voice, in English, "I am unarmed and alone." Dr. Arneson, Ellis thought. He made it after all. Ellis didn't reply, didn't move, He watched, impassive, as Arneson turned a slow circle in the snow, arms raised as high as his misshapen shoulders would allow. Christ, Penner thought. Penner didn't say this bloke was a hunchback. He blinked, wondered if it was a hallucination. Just like 2 weeks ago, when he reported the hoof prints in the church path and was laughed at by his older comrades. Only Major Penner had refrained from laughter. Those tracks had appeared every morning, the day after each death. Each time the gaunt Major would brood thoughtfully over the young corporal's report, stroke the hidden object in his breast pocket, before the snow filled in the hoof tracks and the day's duties took precedence over everything. The tracks of Grilla, the troll goddess, carrying the sack of her unholy offspring? No. Ellis shook his head. No. This is no time for the Major's fairy stories. The man from Reykjavik was here to help. Ellis made safe his weapon, rose and went down to the church path slowly, alert for noise and movement from beyond the lava tubes. He reached a kirkjan and shouldered his weapon. "Welcome to Dimmuborga, Dr. Arneson." The doctor's battered face creased into a smile. The dying sun left a pale smear of scarlet along the snow-coated track before it vanished into midwinter blackness. The gleam in her grandson's eyes as she opens the book is as bright as the flame of the golden candle on his bedside cabinet. He is excited at the yearly ritual of the Christmas Eve storytelling. His childish delight in stories from the mysterious land of ice and fire, of the midwinter dark, is as much a part of the Christmas tradition as the presents under the tree and the turkey they will eat the next day. It used to please her, restore her own childlike love for the land of her birth and the Yule traditions. Traditions she wished to bring to her new, adopted land. She once feared for the new generation here. They seem more concerned about the presents they receive, the sweets and puddings they can devour, rather than embrace the true meaning of the midwinter festival. What she, along with other Icelanders, would call the season of light and peace. To beat back the dark. To recognise the fragile hold on existence humanity has in this most perilous time, and to honour and value the family. Now he is 11, and old enough to know the truth. She looks at the model airplanes dangling from the ceiling, bristling with weaponry, painstakingly painted and detailed. They are strange companions to the chemistry and crystal glowing sets he asked for last year's Christmas presents. A love of science and the military. What will you be when you grow up, little Michael? A scientist or a soldier? Will you continue to question everything, seek knowledge for its own sake and the betterment of humanity? Or will you subdue that spark of intellectual inquiry, become part of a machine that unquestioningly obeys orders without thinking for yourself? She switches off his bedside lamp, and only the candle lights the room. She smiles at the effect it has on him. The sense of drama, the expectation of exciting and chilling tales told over this, one of the most ancient forms of light. He settles back into the pillows, his arms folded, eyes bright with reflected candlelight, as she begins her story. Once upon a time, in the dark fortress of Dimmuborga, there lived a troll called Grilla, who had 13 children. Ellis never got used to descent, and being a sole survivor made it worse. But this was the only link between the topside and the underground base. Every time he used it, he would mutter a prayer to whatever was listening that the motor wouldn't pack in, that the electric feed didn't cut out. Groundless fears, Major Penner had said, because of the extra backups and irregular servicing. Fears that didn't diminish the man from Reykjavik's sense of urgency, which baffled the corporal. The creatures are dead, he thought. What more harm can they do? Ellis cleared his throat. Remind me where your chopper was shot down, Dr. Arneson. Gleðileg farm. The answer was swift, crisp and clear, with no trace of an Icelandic accent. Of course, Ellis thought. He'd been born in the UK, hadn't he? He was just of Icelandic ancestry. 8 clicks from Reykjavík. And you walked all this way, with no further encounters with the terrorists? Arneson grimaced and turned slightly. I am as surprised as you, Corporal. I can only assume they considered the strike a total kill. My pilot was killed when the fuel tanks ignited. The explosion was formidable. They suspected no one could walk away alive. And they left, just like that. Arneson sighed. I understand your suspicions, Corporal, but remember, the sons of Loki are mainly gathered around Reykjavik. They need all the men they can get. The man who launched the RPG at my helicopter doubtless left and rejoined his comrades. Reykjavik. The very name of the capital sent a pang through Ellis. January the 6th would have been the shift change. A relief of duty from this pointless posting. A few nights in Iceland's capital, celebrating a belated Christmas and New Year before flying back to England. But that was before the Sons of Loki's assault. Before DEFCON 1 and communications between Washington and Whitehall died, the base at Keflavik destroyed, and Reykjavik besieged. Doctor, the last communique from Reykjavik was to inform Major Penner of your ETA and that you'd have some answers to what the hell has happened here. But since then, nothing. Arneson gave him a sympathetic smile. His eyes, though piercing, also twinkled. With his bushy white beard and sweeping mane of silver hair, the Icelander had the avuncular look of a favourite uncle dressed as Father Christmas for a children's party. The request for emergency evac was denied by Major Penner himself, Corporal. But I do not think that was unexpected. What you are guarding is far too valuable to be left unmanned. It still crushed him. Ellis grimaced, remembering Major Penner's words the night before he died. It may be that the Sons of Loki have only managed to disrupt lines of communication, but we have to assume the worst, Ellis, that the missiles have launched, and that they've succeeded in bringing about their war, their Ragnarok, if you will. We must face a conclusion that we're on our own, Corporal. So, there was no point in leaving. Dimmu was home for the foreseeable future. But there was still no mention of just what they were guarding, why they had to remain at their posts. What Major Penner gave to Ellis the night he died, no, that was nothing to do with it. Surely. You said all the bodies have been incinerated. There was approval in the Icelander's voice. I am glad to hear it. All except the bastard that took out Penner. Don't worry, Doc. There's a jerry can beside it. As soon as you're done with it, that fucker's going up in smoke. A fitting end and, indeed, a fitting location, Arneson said with a small laugh. In Icelandic folklore, Dimmuborgir connected earth with hell. To the Christians, it is where Satan landed when he fell from heaven. Helvetes catacomba, they say in Norway, the catacombs of hell. And now a morgue for demons, Ellis thought. He shivered as the elevator car slowed for its final descent, and swallowed as the doors hissed open to the rocky underworld. The electric hum of generators echoed throughout the chamber. Would have been comforting if it didn't stutter occasionally. Brief pauses to remind humans that the supply of constant light in the Icelandic underworld was a privilege and not a right. Arc lights replaced the ancient bulb wiring from the bunker's Second World War days. But the 21st century lighting did little to dispel the sense of foreboding and ancient gloom Ellis endured. God knows what it must have been like for the original occupants, he thought. Especially when the power cut out and the lights failed. He regarded the volcanic ceiling of the laboratory, with its geometric swirls and patterns that looked like goblins, then looked down to the floor, pounded down and concreted over 80 years ago. The cracks had been repaired over time, but still they returned. The underworld attempting to break free to the land of the living? Oh, shut the fuck up, Ellis. You're listening too much to what Penner said. He almost wished he'd stayed topside, in the infirmary where the 12 bodies of his comrades lay. Small puffs of powder dust swirled in their wake, and Ellis felt one of the slabs shift beneath his feet. He froze, felt his legs turn to rubber, and then steeled himself to confront the inhuman dead. Arneson's hump was more pronounced now that the doctor had taken off his Arctic camo gear. Clad in faded corduroy trousers and a bizarre hand-knitted Icelandic lopi wool pullover, the deformity moved in the opposite direction to Arneson, who slowly turned to face him. His cobalt eyes followed the corporal's sickened gaze, then looked downwards. I'm sorry, Doctor. I didn't mean... Well, it's just... Please. Arneson raised a hand. It is quite all right. I am used to it. The hump slid in the opposite direction, then back into place, like a blue and white coloured water balloon. Or a sack, Ellis thought. The arc lights flickered and made the deformity ripple. He gazed longingly to the PC bank and its silent radio transmitter. The occasional hiss of static played tricks on him, made him imagine there was still the possibility of further contact from the outside world. From habit, he walked over and checked the CCTV feed. Twilight wasn't far off, and the image displayed was faint, cast in shadows. The wind must have picked up. The doctor's footprints began to fade, covered by fresh snowfall. Ellis blinked, rubbed weary eyes. For a moment, the tracks looked like hoof prints. He walked around the table, facing Arneson, determined to be nowhere near that unsettling hump, and stared down at the corpse of the 12th intruder. Kjodkrukkur, Arneson breathed. Kjodkrukkur, Meat Hook himself. Where the body was exposed, the skin was a putrid grey-green, almost luminescent in the flickering arc lights. The rents in the flesh gaped, like the wounds it had inflicted upon Ellis's commanding officer. But Penner's wounds had steamed as he died, his body heat evaporating in the chilled air, just like the vents in the volcanic plains far south of the volcanic Maivatin region. The shrivelled, child-sized monstrosity before Ellis seemed perfectly at home in the underground chamber. Its wizened face curled and twisted into a stone mask of inhuman hatred. Ellis glanced at the volcanic rock outcroppings, saw how his and Arneson's shadows danced over them, and gave the lava tubes gargoyle faces of their own. The doctor pressed a gloved finger against a hollow belly, and Ellis wrinkled his nose in disgust at the smell that escaped the bullet-torn bowels. There was an aroma of freshly killed meats, like Christmas pork, but the overriding smell was that of sulphur, lava, and molten rock. The meat hook that replaced the creature's right hand smelled of old steel, pitted and bent, stained with rust, but the tip gleamed silver in the arc light, just as it had done when it had killed Major Penner. Meat hook, Ellis thought. An appropriate fucking name. Arneson stared at the petrol can and the feeder pipe beneath the table. I believe Major Penner ordered you not to burn the bodies. Major went loopy. He said some bullshit about waiting till the 5th of January before burning the corpses. That was Penner's last order, even as he lay dying in the snow. Fuck that. Why is that so important, Dog? These things are just some sort of bastard sewing job the terrorists have put together. Arneson's eyebrows rose. Really? Then perhaps you can tell me what creatures the sons of Loki made this from? And what sort of child volunteered to undergo this transformation? It is a child, Corporal. There is no doubt. As were the others who killed your team. He gestured to his kit bag. Pass me my book, please. It is time to tell you a story. It is said the troll gorilla hunts out naughty children who disrespect the White Christ's birth, stuffs them in her sack, and carries them back to her mountain home, where she chops them into tiny pieces and feeds her own children with them. Michael's eyes are wide with the gruesome details, showing both delight and horror in the way only a child can. I think very little scares you now, Michael. I remember how you hid under the bed covers when I first told you of the Yule cat. Now, not even Mother Gorilla scares you. He beams with satisfaction. Is that your job, Grandma? To make sure I'm not scared of anything? She hesitates. The candle flame flickers, and the flying war machines above her cast shadows of machine guns and missiles against the patterned wallpaper. Teddy bears and bunny rabbits writhe as though riddled with bullets, whilst she tells the story of Gorilla's 14 children. Michael stifles a giggle. She raises an eyebrow, and something tells him not to mock her. And the image she shows in her ancient crumbling book is frightening. The coloured woodcut is alive in the dancing candlelight. The meat hook is part of the creature, its bared forearm turning from pale flesh to grey steel. You said there's a worse one than meat hook, Grandma? One that isn't pictured in your book? She nods gravely. He must have noticed the missing page, guessed she had torn it away. She lowers the book and watches the candle flicker. In the old tales, before Jesus, the last Yule lad would appear on midwinter, the darkest night of the year, when light was most precious and vulnerable. Icelandic children were given a tallow candle to light on Christmas Day and to welcome Christ into the world. If the candle was stolen from them, they were hateful in God's eyes. And there was one thief who would steal these candles. Kurtasnika, the thief of light, the most feared of Gleðileg's children, the child without form, the boy without a face. Michael looks into the candle flame thoughtfully. And this is the candle you had since you were my age, Grandma. No, she says. This was made for me the night I left Iceland. The memory makes her fingers tighten on the book, and her nails dig into the ancient pages. Ellis frowned at the A5-sized volume Arneson had packed. It was old, stank of must and mildew, and had no illustrations on the cover. The spine was cracked and held to the leather boards with brown sellotape that crumbled to the touch. He opened it gingerly and winced at the cracking sound. "Careful," Arneson said with a frown. "I have had that book since childhood." Ellis took a quick glance at the pages, with their garishly coloured medieval woodcut-style illustrations. With the foreign language, the book might have been an alien artefact. Sorry, Doctor." He closed the book and passed it to Arneson. "It's been a while since I held a book. Didn't realise it was so valuable." "All books are valuable," Arneson said, "and few more than this one." The doctor placed the ancient volume on the table, just above the dead monster's head. With his liver-spotted left hand, Arneson opened the book tenderly, almost reverently. Legends become fairy tales. Stories told when we are children have seeds of truth and instructions for survival when we become adults. The lights dimmed and the air conditioning faltered. For a brief moment, Ellis thought he heard the roar of the Arctic wind and the patter of ice crystals on the steel-shuttered doors of the topside entrance. Arneson smiled at the corporal's discomfort, noted how the soldier's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "Midwinter darkness, and the reminder we are at the mercy of the elements. This must be how storytellers of old felt, holding their audience spellbound by the light of the fire or candle." Ellis's hand remained on the holster. His fingers brushed the stock of the Sig Sauer P226. Candle, he thought. His hand went instinctively to his breast pocket. He glanced at the elevator doors and fought the urge to run. "Yule Lads, the Yule Lads. What have they to do with the sons of Loki? They revel in their heritage as much as they do in bloodshed. But why, Corporal? Why would they target a lone outpost in the Myvatin region, when Reykjavik's defences still stand? Why in the form of children's monsters? They shot down my helicopter to prevent me getting here. That must tell you something." The lights dimmed again. Shadows danced over the dead intruder's face, emphasizing the angular cheekbones and crooked nose. The eyes appeared to open, but the light returned and reflected off tightly closed lids. "Because even the sons of Loki fear the Yule Lads. Arneson turned a page and held the book up. "Do you recognize this individual?" Ellis tore his gaze from the monster and peered at the illustration. A coloured woodcut of an evil troll-like creature with all too human features, recognisable features. "Jesus," he said. "That's the little fucker that took down Sanders." "Yes, but what is he doing here?" Ellis hesitated, then said, "Slamming a door." "Yes, this is Hudaskillir, the door slammer. I need not remind you of how Sanders met his end. The memory of the steel outer doors slamming into the artillery captain had marked a turning point. Still no explanation had been forthcoming for the override of the automated door control, nor how a steel shutter weighing in excess of a ton had moved with lightning speed to slice Sanders in two. Arneson turned another page. The Voruslicker, the spoon licker, Potterslicker, the pot licker, and Askerslicker, the bowl licker. Major Penner's report indicates cyanide poisoning. Sadly, I do not have the time to conduct a full autopsy on Carlson, Priestley and James, but any native of Iceland will tell you the effects of cyanide and trollspittle are indistinguishable. Troll? Are you shitting me? Their mess kits must have been unattended for a brief moment. But a moment is all the troll lickers need to contaminate eating utensils. Ellis looked even more uncomfortable. Come on, Arneson. You seriously expect me to take that as gospel? The terrorists poison the ration packs. That's all there is to it. Arneson nodded. A reasonable explanation, and one I would have believed myself, even when Arnold's body was discovered the next night, and the mutilation performed upon him. I too believed it to be the work of assassins. He held up the book, and turned it to show his audience the next Yule Lad, a gnome-like creature devouring a glistening pink tube of flesh. Björgna Kroka, the sausage pilferer. Would the sons of Loki hack off a man's penis and blame it on an Icelandic troll child who steals sausages? No, Corporal, no. Arnold's body went missing on the 20th of December, and that is the night Björgna Kroka visits. What is destroying you is not the sons of Loki. Michael no longer finds the story of sausage pilferer amusing. That is good. Now it is the time to learn the truth behind the legends. To know the Julsvanner are not the mischievous imps raiding well-stocked Christmas kitchens as the 19th century storytellers portrayed them. His face is drained of colour, and his hands disappear behind a duvet, unconsciously protecting his manhood. The candle flame is still. The smell of burned wick and melting tallow fills her nostrils. To Michael, it is the smell of Christmas and the promise of material pleasures and feasting on the morrow. To her, it is a reminder of her loss and her duty. There is little room for nostalgia. She shudders and takes a deep breath before continuing. You must understand, Michael, guns will only do so much. Your grandfather came with other soldiers from England to force Iceland out of neutrality, to set up a base from which they could fight the Nazis. The people of my village warned them when we were relocated from Dimmuborga that their presence would be unwelcome to the oldest inhabitants. Even now, she sees the blood staining the white snow, the torn body parts steaming in the caverns, hears the barely human cries of agony as Jasper and his comrades are hacked to pieces by Kjotkrokkur's fearsome weapon. And then, her mother and father, taking Jasper's body from their weeping daughter, hastening to perform the old magic before Yule night fell, to ensure that the most terrible of the ancient inhabitants would not come. His seed is in my belly, she thinks. His light is with me always. Michael is thoughtful. I heard the British Army is building and renewing bases in Iceland. That Scandinavian terrorist group that everyone's worried about, the Sons of Loki. Yes, I have heard of them, Michael. They promised to end the world the way it began, in fire and ice. Madmen, religious fanatics who take their inspiration for slaughter from Nordic legends. It has already started with their slaughter of villages while dressed as the Yule Lads, destroying the magic of Christmas for generations of Icelanders, taking away the innocence of children who would grow up to accept the Jólasveinar as Iceland's version of Father Christmas. Perhaps it would end there, she thought, and they would be wiped out before they embark on their promised next phases. There's talk of new recruitment, of expanding the ranks of the army. I'm thinking, Grandma, when I'm older, I think Grandad might be proud of me. What do you think? The gleam in Michael's eyes as he talks of following in Jasper's military footsteps breaks her heart. Once again, Britain seeks to beat back a new darkness. Once again, they will fail to understand the real darkness is not of human origin. A time is coming when the darkness will fall forever. She suspects her homeland will be the last bearer of the light. The candle flame flickers. Despite the smell of melting fat, the tallow cylinder has not diminished in the hour of storytelling. Ellis had little difficulty accepting Arneson's story. The 12 intruders, their origins in a dark, mythic Scandinavian past, would be easy to dismiss had he not seen their faces himself, and how identical they were to the woodcut illustrations in Arneson's ancient book. The flicker of light this time came from the CCTV feed. Ellis started, his jaw dropping at the sight on the monitor. The eyes shone in the reflected light of the bunker lobby. They were not cobalt, but widened, panicked orbs of hazel. Neither did the figure stoop with the burden of a hunchback. Instead, wounds in scorched Arctic issue uniform oozed blood that steamed in the night snowfall. The very image of a man who has barely survived a helicopter crash, and then assaulted by something that tried to tear into him, into his core of being. "Arneson!" Ellis said in a hoarse voice. He opened the outside comms channel. An Arctic night screamed from the speakers. "Ellis! Let me in!" Ellis's storyteller closed his book, and with his hump, waddled over to the communications panel. He consulted his wristwatch. "Do not open the doors, Corporal." The 14th visitor must have heard him. His transmitted scream was louder than the Icelandic gale. "For God's sake, Ellis! That's not me! That's not me! You've let the last Yule Lad in! Get out of there while you can!" Ellis's besieged mind raced. Jesus, who's the real one? 1600 hours, Corporal. The Arneson in the underworld spoke softly, calmly. Darkness has fallen, and Yule night is here. Time for the very last Yule Lad. Kertasnika, the candle thief, the thief of light, the very son of darkness himself, Grilla's most feared child, the shapeshifter. He tapped the monitor. Your last visitor. "Ellis! Please tell me you haven't burned the bodies!" The external Arneson was close to tears. "We ordered Penna not to do so." "Not until 12th night." Ellis's storyteller cracked a wide, unholy smile. "A fire to celebrate the end of Yule, and the only way to banish the Jólasveinar." He leant over the microphone. Too late, Arneson. Too late. My brothers' bodies are burned and their spirits are with me. The horror and despair on the monitor screen was unlike anything Ellis had seen before. It was the look of a man who's been told the end of the world is here. Ellis backed away slowly. The P226 was in his hand, a round chambered. He brought the sidearm up to bear on the doctor. "He's not in your book, is he?" The pulsing in Arneson's back was constant. It appeared as natural to him as breathing, as the blood that pumped through his veins, as the heart that beat in his chest. The hump was one with him, yet had a life of its own. Arneson stood slowly, his arms extended, palms held aloft. The arc lights flickered again, and the heating vents stuttered. The generators gave a last heaving sigh and then died with the light. The despairing face on the monitor disappeared. Ellis fired 3 times into the doctor. Muzzle flashes turned the underground room into a stroboscopic nightmare, a cavern of hell where the rock walls took the faces of monsters from Arneson's book and turned ancient, malice-filled eyes of purest cobalt upon him. The barking of the automatic pistol made Ellis's ears ring, but he kept firing, relishing the twisting, jerking silhouette of the Icelander as each round struck home. Each useless. Ellis felt the coldness that emanated from Arneson, a thick tendril of Arctic air, darker than night itself, as the last of the Yule Lads made itself known. The air stank of cordite and ancient stone. Cobalt eyes opened again and blazed in the subterranean dark. This time they were joined by another pair from the table. The eyes of Meathook were the same piercing electric blue of Arneson's. Pinprick pupils of blackness shifted, took in the last invader of Dimmu and hissed in welcome. Ellis cried out and stepped backwards, feeling the loose slab underneath shift. The Sig Sauer fell from his hand, clattered on the floor. His vision spun, and more cobalt eyes opened in the lava tubes and rock outcroppings to watch his fall. Light flared as his skull cracked on the edge of the mortuary table. Fresh light, white stars that danced like candle flames in a gust of wind. The faces of the Yule Lads vanished momentarily, replaced by the anguished face of Major Penner, gazing down at him with sympathy and urgency, and as also as if parting a message. Candle, Ellis thought. He had a weapon he could use after all. He ignored the pain in his back and elbows and unzipped his breast pocket. The bubble-wrapped cylinder of wax felt comforting, righteous. He now knew what he was guarding, why Penner had refused to request evacuation. It never was in the base of Dimmu. It was with us all along, he realised. He fumbled for the lighter in his other pocket. The Zippo flared, but the darkness did not retreat. In the brief moment of igniting the ancient wick, a true vision of the infernal underworld presented itself to him. Meathook grinned down at him. The butcher's hook gleamed an impossible silver, the pits of rust now bright, running rivulets of fresh blood. Behind it, serpents of blackness that defied the light tailed into the lifeless body of a squat, pulsating, sack-like creature. Snakes, worms that clung to the rocks of the chamber and imparted dark life to the creatures within. All of which froze when the candle flared into light-giving life. Now the cobalt eyes of the Yule Lads turned hungrily to the tiny beacon in the dazed corporal's hand. Kjordkrukr, Meathook himself, hissed as the flame ceased flickering, grew and expanded into a flaming torch of pure, brilliant white light. Then the puppet master urged Meathook forward on its tentacle, made it raise its butcher's weapon. Ellis sat cross-legged on the crumbling ground, impervious to the clouds of dust that marked the shifting of the tectonic plate far below the Icelandic underworld. He closed his eyes, felt the final explosions rock in Reykjavik far to the southeast, with each chunk torn from his body. But his hands would not relinquish the candle. The last light-bearer remained seated, waiting for a dawn that would never come, while the remains of humanity tore themselves to pieces on the last night of the season of light and peace. The candle flares briefly as she opens the door to the landing. She turns back, watches his serious face crease into a frown, and the small gasp escapes his lips. She nods in approval. He dreams not of the Julsvinir, but the genesis of the candle. It is his birthright, and though it terrifies him, he will soon understand its magic, its promise of salvation, and the dark forces that hunger to extinguish it. She closes the door slowly, gently, and leaves him to his nightmares of faceless darkness. The candle guards his sleep, and will still be burning when he wakes. In the draught from the closed door, the flame flickers. Despite its everlasting fuel of human tallow, the light struggles to remain alive on this, the darkest of all nights. And Michael wakes. He awakes from a nightmare of his grandfather burning to death, his fat running into a bubbling cauldron poured into an ancient candle mould, the final product of Sergeant Jasper Arneson's sacrifice. The candle flame burns brightly, as though aware of the scrutiny upon it, greeting him. Michael licks nervous fingers and pinches the wick. It burns, and the smell of melting fat is joined by the aroma of crisp skin. But he feels relief. He will sleep better now. The darkness welcomes him.